so for her, you know, it's like, why now? Why would you choose death? And one of her answers was just because I can. This is a moment that I can make that decision. And she had a real interest in life, a zest for life. She was also clear that she didn't want to stretch out her life beyond the point that she felt relevant. And her nightmare of dementia never came to pass, but she had given up freedom along with her car. She was falling really frequently. 911 was there at the house picking her up off the floor, sometimes once a month, sometimes twice a week. I still have a picture of Dr. Z at one of our early meetings sort of saying, and I just do this each time I think of you as you go home. And she was saying, well, life's getting not so much fun anymore. She was frustrated that she napped through most of her days. She was having a hard time following conversations, a hard time following current events, reading material. And I felt like she really navigated all of that with grace. She had clever gizmos all over the place to help her live independently. She had just acknowledged that the kitchen was just too dangerous to be in. She was close to the point where she couldn't get out of a chair by herself. And that was really why it was her decision time. It was, she adamantly didn't want to live in a nursing home. She didn't want to be dependent on care for every personal function or to have to move from her home. And so then when I said, well, things weren't always so, while she was clear, it's like as we got to it, there were sort of left turns, right turns, maybe I'll do this, maybe I'll do that, but she did choose to stop eating and drinking. And had our whole family on board. And in some ways, her last month, she would sometimes say, this is just the best way to go. And some of it was because this community, you know, her community of friends, really circled around her and gave her a phenomenal amount of attention and an incredible goodbye. And so I don't know if that hits ethics, but that's a jumping point.
So, can you hear me? My name's Laurie Loisel, and I guess I will just say that I have, it's not theoretical for me or far off. I have two concrete examples of end-of-life issues that kind of played out very differently and taught me a lot. And the first was my father in the summer of 2012 started telling me and my siblings that he had this idea he was going to kill himself. And he had a really specific idea that he was going to go to a police station, take a gun, and shoot himself. Because if he did it that way, the police would find him, and they're prepared. And so I thought that wasn't a very good idea at all, and I told him that. And my siblings also, although we all thought it was his choice to do what he wanted to do, it just to me seemed like a stupid idea. I can't say it any other way. It just didn't seem like a good idea. Oh, okay. Sorry. So now can you hear me? Okay. So I kind of thought that he meant he would do this if he became frail and unable to take care of himself. But about a couple months later, in November of 2012, it sort of became clear that he actually had a plan, even though he didn't have any illness. He lived by himself, drove his car, lived in an apartment complex with other elderly people, and he would be the one who would scrape everybody's car off when there was a snowstorm. I mean, he was very fit. And he liked to do a lot of things. He kind of reminded me of Lee because he had a zest for life, and he was in a book club. these classes at the University of Maine, and he discovered he was an atheist, and he was just so excited that he discovered he was an atheist, and he just liked to talk about it. He told my brother told me they went to open a safe deposit box, and he said, "I'm an atheist," to the bank teller. And he just wanted to talk to anybody about it, and so that's just like, he was just like, and when we had his funeral, a lot of people got up and said he was sort of more alive than anybody I knew. So I just thought this was something he was going to do when he was 95. And then, so anyway, long story short, my family had a gathering in November, like a Thanksgiving, before Thanksgiving, and we all had a really nice time, and we kind of talked openly about that he had this idea, and we very gently kind of put it on the table, and all said we'd rather that he didn't do that, and all talked about ways we wanted to support him and how we could help make his life more comfortable. And we kind of thought that we had talked him out of that crazy idea. And then he went home and did it exactly the way he said he was going to do it. So then what happened was my family, we decided this was not something we were going to hide, that we put it in the obituary, we told everybody. I just couldn't not talk about it, because the way he died was as important as the fact that he died. So, it was in the obituary. And then later, a few months later, I wrote a column that appeared in the Gazette explaining why we were public about it. And Lee Hawkins sent me a letter thanking me for the column and saying, "Your father's a hero to me." And and I knew her from the Unitarian Society, but I didn't know her that well. And I knew her like acquaintance, kind of knew her. And so she told me that she sent me this letter basically saying, I plan to take my life when certain things happen. This is my plan, and my kids know it. And so I just called her and said, "Can I come have tea?" When we had tea, and she just, we talked and talked and talked. And then I just said, "I'd like to really write about your process." So I did that. One story one summer, a couple of years ago, I think it was. Anyway, then what happened was, so I just want to say one thing about life and death and denial. When my father told us that he was going to do this, I thought to myself, he won't do this. There's no way he's going to do this. And then Lee, I became to know Lee pretty well, and she told me, when she told me in June, this past June, that she has decided she was going to stop eating and drinking, even though I had spent a lot of time with her for that previous year talking about these issues, I thought to myself, she's not going to do that. And it's just kind of amazing that it's really hard to kind of let your brain wrap around the fact that someone might actually do this thing. So anyway, all I want to say is that my experience with my father and my experience with Lee, they both did what they wanted to do, but one of them felt so much more sane to me and so much more compassionate to me. And I sometimes think, if we had more openness in discussing our feelings about end of life, that my father wouldn't have felt like he had to take a gun and do it, because he might have had other choices. But I really feel like he felt like that was the only choice he had. And the experience I had watching Lee and her family was just profoundly moving. It was very intimate, and it was loving and supportive, and a lot of laughing. And I mean, this past summer I was there almost every day, and it was just an uplifting experience because there was somebody doing what she wanted to do with great support from her family, and there was so much love. So I think that's all I wanted to say. And I just want to say too, if anybody has any questions about what the Gazette did in running this series, or objections or disagreements, I'm totally open to hearing them. And we don't have to agree on this, or we don't have to agree on what the paper did was right. It's just all fodder for discussion, I think. So, thanks.
My name is Carol, and I am the photo editor of the Gazette, and the one that worked very closely with Laurie on photographing and Lee and her family, photographing the story. I think what I have to say is that I'm not sure I thought about this issue a ton before I got kind of in the middle of this story. I've been around a couple of deaths. I photographed another one through a story we did on hospice, but I'm not sure it's something I had really completely thought through. And I think my job is a very unique job in that what it really requires me to do is to step back and watch and to see and to try to grab moments that are happening before me. And within that, you feel, because that's what happens. And in watching that as a death, it was exactly what Laurie said. It was an incredibly moving, and I was shocked by how joyous it was. I mean, it was sad. I don't want to take that away from what it was to lose Lee, but I didn't really know this family beforehand. And they let us in with 100% access, and I saw their ups and their downs, but what I saw more than anything was laughter. And I walked away from that experience going, this is how I want to die. Like, this is how I want to do it. And I don't know what else to say more than that, really, except that I feel incredibly privileged and thankful for being able to be part of that and for learning and watching what it was. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I don't know if there's anything else to be said. I have some questions. I'll read the questions and then the panelists can decide who would be most appropriate to answer. Do you think any differently about end-of-life ethical choices if religious beliefs are important as the normative values? That would be Tim.
Okay. So I think it's a great question. The answer, in short, is that I don't, because I think that the framework that I tried to lay out can account for multiple sources of values. And it's certainly the case that most of the major religions also have major normative teachings about the end of life. So, you know, when you think through at least the major religions in this country, Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, have a lot of rituals centered around the dying process. And in fact, structure a lot of the rituals when people aren't dying, structure those rituals in a way that explicitly anticipates death and the afterlife. So insofar as that's the case, they end up then having frameworks through which to think about the meaning of life, frameworks that are very closely attached to the idea of death and what happens after death. That's something that they all have in common. Now, you know, these three faith systems have lots in common. They're all Abrahamic faith systems. But even more than that, then, I think one way, I'm not sure what the questioner had in mind. So I think on one hand, I would say I don't think differently about these kinds of values when religion is involved, because religion is one of many possible sources of values, and the values still seem to function in the same way. There's an element, though, to the religious experience that I think becomes relevant when you think about end-of-life questions in communities where not everyone shares the same religious tradition. And I think that element has to do with whether or not one holds one's religious values in such a way as one believes they should apply to everyone, even if they're not a part of the religious faith tradition. Right? So it's one thing to say, you know, I think this works for me and this is how I want to die. And most of what we've talked about tonight actually has revolved around individual values, the values of the person dying. But that neglects something else, and it neglects actually something that Sue brought out, which was the importance of community. Right? That we don't live in a vacuum, that in fact our values not only are influenced by people in our community, but the way we live our lives through our values affects other people in the community as well. So to the extent that folks who are part of religious traditions aren't part of just a set of ideas, but they're part of a community of people who share those values with them, it can become difficult when folks within or without your tradition don't share those values. Because depending on how you hold them, you may hold them in a way that you think, not only is this how I think I should die, this is how someone else in my faith tradition should die, but this is how everyone should die. And that takes, I think, the flavor underneath some of what's been said tonight, which has been a little bit of a libertarian flavor, right? The idea that I want to die this way, you want to die that way, well, that's fine. And it says that's not the only way to think about it. That choices that are made in communities, they don't just affect the people making those choices, they affect the whole community. So to the extent that religious values make that question more explicit, say, than non-religious values, it can change the way that we think about the role of values in decision-making, because it tends to create a hierarchy in which some values count more than others. And I don't know whether that's a good or bad thing, but it's a different thing than what we've been talking about so far. So that's one way in which I think it can affect end-of-life ethics. Hospice, by the way, is no exception to that. So the hospice philosophy of care, which happens to be a philosophy of care that I believe in religiously, but it comes from a certain tradition, right? So, you know, Cicely Saunders was heavily Anglican, and Christianity affected deeply her picture of what hospice care was supposed to be. And while in the United States, that explicit Christianity has kind of filtered out of hospice care, there are still some norms in hospice care. And you see this, for example, when someone who's on hospice and is in terrible pain doesn't want to take pain medication. That's a real challenge for people who work in hospice, because we know we have the medication right here, it's safe, it will take your pain away. It's very difficult to care for someone who refuses that. Because part of the hospice philosophy of care is we relieve symptom distress. And it can be easy for hospice nurses and physicians to actually feel like they must be failing in some way if this person doesn't want their symptom distress relieved. So it's not just, I think, religious values that have these sources in larger communities that share values, but certain philosophies, like a philosophy of care, raises those same questions. And I think that was one of the questions that led to the hospice calling me, is to say, you know, we have someone who wants to make a choice, we want to support that choice, but that choice, we're not sure if it aligns with the hospice philosophy or not. Help us think through that. So whether it's a religious community or a non-religious community, the extent to which values come not just from individuals but also communities really does affect, I think, how we think about other people's rights to make decisions without consulting us. So that's one way I think that religious values might affect end-of-life decisions. Perhaps, though, you all have some thoughts, too. I'd love to bring this to you, but I'm not sure it'll reach. Okay. Well, I guess it'll reach a little bit.
I want to bring up something that happened. We had a little meal before I came over here, and Tim mentioned that there was another case in Florida somewhat similar to this, and the hospice group down there made a different decision. They said, no, we really can't offer care for this person who wants to stop eating and drinking. Am I getting the story right?
Yeah.
So I think each community is different. That was one thing I wanted to say. And the other was community. I like what you said about one person, how they can influence community, because I think that's what we saw with Lee. She made an ad hoc community, people from her church, people in her community, where she lived. She brought me in. She brought all of you. And all of a sudden we were part of this circle of somebody's very personal but very open space. And it was a wonderful community to be part of. And I too miss that community. That was great. So this is a funny reunion, but I'm glad we're here.
Next question. There are more medical interventions now to create complexity, but there is nothing complicated about being ready to go. Why do medical professionals insist on making it complicated? Why are lucid elderly people immediately suspected of dementia and depression as soon as they suggest they are ready to go?
We'll let the doctor answer that one.
I just had a thought, because if you read the articles, we had an issue where after Mom already had started on the hospice program, more as introduction, and she was in pain, and so we were working with her pain control and getting a handle on how she did with pain meds and just feeling out what the process was going to be. So we were supported before she stopped eating and drinking. And now I've lost the thread already. Just dementia, right. So we had talked previously with the hospice team about should she be evaluated. We were all quite certain she was not depressed. She would go through the whole, as Dr. Z was examining her, and it was like, where does it hurt? Well, basically from head to toe in every joint, and she couldn't get up, and she couldn't this, and how is your sense of well-being? And she'd say, oh, that's a 10. You know, so there wasn't much sense that she was really depressed about life. And yet it felt sort of like a really, and I was very annoyed by the timing of when we were asked, would she consider evaluation? But they were making up protocols as Mom's process was going on. And it was actually also a really good thing. I felt like good to have somebody evaluate not just her, but was there coercion from the family? Was she really clear in her mind? I don't know that in our case that it personally set us at ease, but it might in some families, to really know that, is it really okay for this person? Is it okay within the family? Mom really took us into account. That might have been something in Laurie's dad's situation that might have enabled him to turn around and really look at his family and know that what he was doing was a hurtful thing. So I can see where, you know, you really get into gray lines.
And I'd like to go back to the thread of the question. Why do doctors feel they have to, et cetera? I'm a doctor. I remember when I thought about doing this when I was young, I said, I think there was, for me, doctoring was good. I had asthma as a kid. Doctors were healing. They put their hand on me. They gave me a medicine. I felt better. I just felt like, boy, this is something I'd like to do. Fast forward years, could I do that? It was pretty daunting to think about it. And then I saw some bad examples. My grandmother had a doctor that was just closed-minded and rigid. And more and more I heard about these stories about people as doctors. I said, well, I'm not going to be that way. And then the proof in the pudding comes when you start in your training, and every single day you're hammered to do this one way. And it wasn't ask the patient what they wanted. It was, what does the book say? So I trained in the 70s, early 80s. That's getting to be a while ago. How much has changed? Well, I will say nicely that some of the newer doctors that I've started to work with at the hospital, very refreshing. They look at me not as somebody who's kind of telling them what to do or getting this emotional, social, spiritual stuff in the midst of getting their job done. They say, oh, you do palliative care. Hey, let me talk to you about somebody. They've got a problem. Maybe you could help. So it's getting to be more collaborative. It's slowly changing, but it's like the Exxon Valdez. It didn't change fast enough for a lot of people, and it hit a reef. A lot of people get hurt because we have a lot of people that are rigid. Some of that, though, I see my patients' fears, their wishes, and then I see the doctors I work with, same thing. We're all human. The sooner we talk about it, the better. And doctors are afraid. They're afraid they'll do something wrong. They're afraid they're not doing what they're supposed to do. Well, we're just in the midst of helping them to do it a different way. And it's been refreshing for me to go from general medicine to palliative care and hospice, because I go to annual meetings and local meetings, and I realize there's a whole group of people that is growing bit by bit, and all the people I work with at VNA and hospice, we have all these teams now that want to work as a team, and they have a great attitude, and they want to help people, and they want to listen. So I think it's changing, medicine's changing. If you see a doctor that's rigid, think fear. I think they're afraid. And I saw this today in the hospital with one person who needed more pain medicine, and the doctor said, "Oh no, that's enough." I said, "But it's not enough. They're still having a lot of pain." After a conversation, they said, "Well, maybe you're right." So it's a slow process. We're going to keep working on it because it's so vital, and I turned 60 this past year. I want somebody good when I'm a little older.
Thank you. The next question is something that's come up before, and I don't know that we have the answer, but it's certainly worth talking about. It's really important. It says, how to get comfortable with this subject. Not all of us have support. This has come up before. There are people in our community, and maybe people in this room, who don't have family they trust or a community network of people that they can count on. So what do we do for those people?
I'm brave. A gentleman came up and asked this question of me after our community forum, I don't know, 6 months ago. And I've thought a lot about that. And I've started to use different language as we have meetings at the hospital or VNA to say, well, who is your healthcare proxy? Who do you want to speak for you? And you can't say your friend or your family, because some people live a very private life and they don't have a lot of connections. So what's the answer for that person? Well, there's 3 levels of protection to get your wishes done in the state of Mass. The first is, you can tell us what you want. Great. We will listen to you. What if you're groggy? What if you can't tell me? Then I'm going to look for somebody else to speak for you. If there is no person to stand up and speak, I'm going to look for a document that says, here's the basics, here's what I want and what I don't want. So, the MOLST form, if you want to fill that out, it will ensure that there are certain things doctors will look at and say, yes, you want this, no, you don't want that. You'll get a rough framework of what you want. You won't maybe have somebody to speak for you. However, I would recommend you have a good connection with some healthcare person. Make that connection. If you don't like the person you've got, go to somebody else until you find somebody you can talk to and lay it out. Tell them what you want. They will be around when you're sick and they can speak for you. So I think that's the best answer I've got to that question, but it's haunted me for months now, and I'm glad it comes up again today. Thank you.
Suggestions to best support person at home with 3rd cancer, no treatment possible, no appetite, late stage 3, too tired to care, quote unquote.
Jeff, you're hot button here.
I don't mind being on the hot seat. Well, I'd say you got to come up with your values. Tim has said, what are your values? As you look at advanced care planning, what are your values? talk to people you know. What kind of fabric of community do you have? What decisions have you undertaken to make? Which ones do you still need to work on? Pull that together. You want to make sure that your planning is together so that you can feel one load is off your shoulders. You have an illness, stage 3, stage 4, all these big numbers that basically the bigger the number, it's always harder. I look at it as you're at a part of life where you need unique support. So if this is cancer, I recommend people go to the Cancer Connection if they can get there. They have groups. You're not alone. You have people to talk to. If it's heart disease, lung disease, it's not quite as easy, but there are groups starting to form. So I would say, don't feel alone. If you do feel alone, reach out, get some fabric around you. If you have special medical needs, the visiting nurse can go out, meet you, talk to you. If it looks like you're really near the end of your life, that's the last 6 months or so, that's hospice appropriate. Depending on insurance, they have slightly different rules, but we gladly look into it for you. That's the kind of team, much like the team that formed around Lee. They got to know her. They said, what do you need? How can we help you? And you won't feel alone. And I think when I always look at somebody in bed, I'll say, if it were me, what would I want? And the answer hasn't changed year after year. I'd like someone to hold my hand. I'd like somebody to smile and be caring to me. And I'd like to be relatively comfortable. I think if you have that, you can get through it. Dying isn't the worst thing in the world. It's challenging. On the way there, the more support you have, the better you do.
Maybe I'll just reinforce that idea too, that it's not just something that comes from the experience of caregivers, but there's a really robust research literature out there on things that work and things that don't when you're a non-healthcare professional caregiver for someone who's really sick or dying. And the thing that Jeff emphasized is the thing that again and again and again is the #1 predictor of successful as opposed to unsuccessful caregiving, which is what's the support structure that's in place. So if you don't have a pre-existing support structure, in other words, you don't have family that live locally, or they live locally, but you just don't like them, or you don't have a faith community or some kind of other civic group that you belong to. Now's the time, perhaps, either the person who has this stage 3 cancer or the person who's their primary caregiver, now's the time to swallow your pride and ask for help. There's no shame in asking for help. In fact, it's the human condition. You weren't born on your own. This idea that you should be able to die on your own is an odd one. It's a uniquely American idea, actually. So now's the time to explore ways to put those support structures in place. It could be asking neighbors for help or assistance. It could be, it sounds like this particular patient is a cancer patient. It could be asking to sit down and talk with the social worker at wherever that cancer patient is getting cancer treatment. It's surprising the resources that are out there that social workers can hook you up with. You don't have to be really poor to qualify for paid assistance in the home. There are foundations out there who support paid assistance in the home. There are volunteers out there who are looking to help assist in the home. But one thing's for sure is if you feel like this question reveals to me someone who's very insightful, someone who loves the person with cancer very much, and someone who knows that they're just about getting to the edge as a caregiver. And what I would suggest is listen to that. Know yourself that you're getting to the point where you need help. If this person with cancer is someone who's insisting that you're the only one they want taking care of them, it's the difficult but perhaps right time to say, that doesn't work anymore. The care that I'm giving you is going to be subpar. I need help. The other thing, perhaps to validate if I'm hearing this question appropriately, is that there's nothing about caregiving that's easy or means that every day should be filled with thankfulness and joy. If this caregiver was also a patient, or was also a parent, right? I don't have children myself, and that's because I'm rather convinced I would not be a good parent. But my sister has kids, many of you have kids, it can't be the case, right, that every day you woke up and heard the child screaming and the two fighting in their room after school and said, man, it's just a great day to be alive. So simply to validate that it's normal to have feelings of exhaustion, feelings of anger, bitterness, resentment, that's part of being a caregiver too. You would not be human if you weren't having those feelings. And those feelings are a sign, I think, that it's time for a change. It's time for more assistance. It's time for better sleep. It's time maybe to swallow pride and ask for help wherever you can ask for help. It could be from people you know, or it could be from people at the Cancer Center. There are resources out there. They can make it a little easier. But as has become clear tonight, and as you already know, the question asker, it's not easy though. But it will be easier if there are 2, 3, 4 people involved than if there's just one person involved. And we have a robust literature that suggests that's the case. So it would actually be a sign of being a good caregiver if you tried to get some more help. It would not be a sign of failing as a caregiver.
And actually, this question reminded me of a story from our agency. We're not perfect, but I think sometimes we're pretty darn great. I started out with this agency 20 years ago, left for a while, and I went back because I'm so proud of the work that the VNA Hospice does. But on Friday of last week, we received an email. We have a website, not very fancy. It has work to be done, but there's a contact us page. And we got an email through that web page, a contact through that page saying, help, I'm desperate. Within 15 minutes, that caregiver had a response, and within 24 hours, they had services. And I think that's really remarkable. That speaks about the team that we have, but it also highlights what Jeff and Tim have said, which is that you're not alone. I mean, the internet, they say most of the time you should stay away from the internet if you're struggling with an illness. You don't want to Google too much. But that there is a benefit to the internet, which is that there was that lifeline for that person, and they could reach out, and they got a response. And we couldn't fix everything, but we're working on it, and we're supporting that person, and she doesn't feel as alone anymore. Can you talk more about the deck of cards to help make decisions, determine ethical values? Are they purchased online?
That's a pretty easy one. You can get the deck of cards, or after I bought a few decks, I realized you can do it online. So I think it's called Make-A-Wish.
Go Wish.
Go Wish. Thank you. My secretary's not here, but you get to pay later. So that's where to go. Just go online and you'll find you can make these choices. I remember in the deck of cards there were a couple blanks also. So you could write something in that wasn't on the list of prescribed ones, just so your wish gets known. So my wife and I did that, and it was fun. And I realized, oh, I thought we did things always the same. And, well, no. Everybody's got different flavors about what's important to them. And I'm sure if I went back and did it again, it might be a little different now than a couple years ago. So go Wish. Thank you.
Can you please address how to approach healthcare decisions or surrogate decision maker, parentheses guardian, for someone who has a lifelong cognitive impairment, intellectual disability, particularly if the person has a chronic physical impairment with chronic medical fragility?
We need help for this one. Kathy, would you mind coming up? This is where you use your community to help. By the way, she was going to go to the gym right after this. Come on over. You can be brave.
Oh, no.
She'll get me later.
Okay. Well,
So-
I asked that question.
I work for Department of Developmental Service. I work with people with lifelong intellectual or developmental disabilities. And it's really hard around decision-making when at some point people are not, I mean, there's a legal